You're listening to the Truth About Fur podcast, your home for truth about the fur trade in Canada and around the world. The Truth About Fur podcast is a co-production of Blood Origins Canada and the Fur Institute of Canada.
So we were just talking about your new backdrop behind you, a collection of furs.
I gotta give a shout out to our friends at International Fur Dressers and Dyers in Winnipeg, who thought my one lonely fisher was not going to cut it for the executive director of the Fur Institute to be talking with just one fur behind them. So Matthew at International took care of me and sent me a box of fur to put on the wall.
Oh, that's cool. There you go. Good for you. Yeah, you look like our intro video now. So
yeah, I haven't suddenly become a master trapper and went and trapped all these myself.
A master acquirer of furs. So good for you. Good for you. So you can just sit on those and watch the prices.
Yeah, I'm now officially a fur speculator. That's my my new gig.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm making lots of money off these furs. Like, for the time invested in getting them to the price I'm getting, it's a really good return. You'll have the trappers putting you in a body gripper. So
yeah, I'm gonna get angry letters now.
No, it looks good. We were just talking about just cool to have like the collection of the valuable species from across Canada. That would be a neat collection, especially when you get into things like the foxes that just got so many, and coyotes is so many variations in the colors. Boy, you could create a massive,
you could
massive
fill
collection.
The whole room with different color phases of coyotes or different color phases of fox. I got 3 foxes here. I got your classic red fox and cross fox and a white fox, but there's all kinds of different combinations of things. Silver foxes, and then you get into the ranch fur side, and you get all kinds of different different mutations there as well. So.
As well, I saw a picture. I believe this was from a trapper down in the U.S. Had must have been like a leucistic pine marten, and it was
cool.
It wasn't pure white, but it was kind of that peachy off white, like just a little bit of dirty, but super like head to toe was kind of this blonde color.
Yeah, I've seen some pictures kicking around this season of someone got a leucistic wolf. I think it was in Alberta. Or maybe the wolf was in Newfoundland, the coyote was in Alberta. I saw pictures of a leucistic wolf and a leucistic coyote. One was in Alberta, one was in Newfoundland, but I can't remember which was which. Yeah.
Now, something like that would probably have better value going towards somebody that's going to make something out of it, or taxidermy or something, because it would almost be like doesn't fit the categories for the fur auctions. Because
that's a lot of those kind of out of the ordinary stuff ends up going towards taxidermy. I mean, often the trapper themselves will take it to taxidermy, or thinking towards stuff even like canary marten, like the very, very yellow martens. Oftentimes you see those go to taxidermy as well. And and there's some stuff that has different color phases that is, sought after in the market, thinking of like raccoons, like what they'll call fisher raccoons, that are basically raccoons that are the color of fishers. There'll be, you go through, as you're scrolling, flipping through the catalog at the auction, there'll be some lots that are, here's a fisher raccoon, or here's bastard fox, or some of that stuff. But, the super, albinos and leucistic, and that usually is much more in the taxidermy market.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. So it's pretty neat. Just it's cool to see what nature does with the various genetics and.
Oh yeah, I can remember the first time I was at the fur auction in North Bay a couple years ago, and sitting there, flipping through the catalog as we're going through the lots, and leaning over to different board members of mine and stuff that were there, being like, what does this mean? What does this mean? After the first day and a half, when I finally had started to wrap my head around grades and sizes, then I was like, what do these other words mean? Now that I've figured out the letters and numbers, what do the words mean?
Right. It's a whole world in itself. So. Kicking off, so speaking of fur and fur auctions and sales, you got some updates on Saga Fur auction results. Was that Finland?
That's in Finland, yeah. So Saga is the largest auction house in the world right now. They're a ranch fur auction in Helsinki. They do enormous numbers of mink, enormous numbers of fox, some Finn raccoon as well goes through, and Swakara goes through Saga as well. But they had their first, they had a sale here just in the start of March, the 8th to the 13th. It was depending on who you are, it was an encouraging sale. There were certainly on the mink side a lot of the lighter varieties, pearls and sapphires and pastels were in high demand. Almost 100% clearances on those and healthy prices. Some of them north of, let me do bad math in my head, north of $200 a skin in certain cases. So we're certainly seeing a strengthening and stabilization and strengthening of the mink market. Because there's just not enough mink in the market. There's not enough production anymore with Denmark out and with some of these other countries that are not producing the numbers that they were. We're probably somewhere in the ballpark of like maybe 9 million mink being produced in the world each year. So compared to 10 years ago when like 40 million mink were getting produced every year. So there's definitely demand in the market for certain colors and certain breeds. And not as strong on the darker side of mink, things like black mink, not nearly as strong as some of those lighter colors. So but even those, half decent clearances even on the dark colors as well. So we'll see if that continues to hold in the next few auctions over the course of the year. But certainly there were certainly some happy mink ranchers around the world and here in Canada after the last sale.
Cool. Now, does an auction like that or the other auctions, does one kind of like set the tempo for like future sales? Like if prices are like this at this auction, that will kind of like set the stage for future auctions. Like there's stock markets that kind of work like that. There's your big ones, which are your indicators of where the world's at in certain things.
Yeah, so there's certainly looking at the mink auction landscape such as it is right now. Really, there's kind of two players left. There's Saga in Helsinki, and then there's the American Mink Exchange, which is based in the U.S. Saga is the larger of the two. So for them, they really are kind of setting the market just because they're bigger. Doesn't mean that everything that happens at Saga will get imitated at AME. They've got different collections. They offer different things to different buyers, in terms of collections and number of animals available, things like that. But, back 10, 20 years ago when there were a lot more auctions, you could certainly see a trend through, as I understand it from people that were actually in the industry then, you could see a trend across over the course of a season, and you could see stuff turn around over the course of a season if folks weren't getting what they needed or weren't able to find what they needed. If there was a lot of pastels on the Saga sale, then NAFA might be going after, and see that there's really strong in pastels, then NAFA might be working a lot harder to bring some of those pastel ranchers over to NAFA. A lot more competition between the auction houses to get a hold of buyer groups and seller groups to say, come sell your stuff here at NAFA versus selling it at Copenhagen or versus selling it at Saga. Or ALC, a lot of demand. And then on the wild fur side, the same between fur harvesters and NAFA, and Western Canadian raw fur auctions when they were still open as well. There was, they had a bit more regionality to them, as I understand it, of kind of, there were certain parts of North America that sold their furs through, for the most part, through NAFA, others for the most part through fur harvesters, others for the most part through Western Canadian. But, much more, if you're from this province, you get a good buyer group, you get a good good agent who was bringing in stuff for that region to that auction house. So,
yeah, interesting. So, I think the main message there is, even though there, like you said, there isn't the volume of mink available, it's still demonstrating in other places of the world and buyers that there is generally an uptick in demand for fur and the growth of the market for it, which will bode well everywhere in the world. Everybody that's trapping and putting fur into the market or breeders. So another good positive indicator coming out of Finland. So what about the fur harvesters auction results updates?
Yeah, so FHA up in North Bay had their first sale of the year. They do 2 sales now, one in March, one in June. So the FHA, the story at FHA was a bit more varied, I will say. Prime big size beavers sold for really good prices. $75, $90 American for big XL, 2XL prime beavers, dark beavers. The smaller beavers, lighter beavers, stuff that in the past few years we've been seeing, bring really heavy prices because of the hatter market. Bit less demand this year, as we understand it. A lot of the hat manufacturers are kind of still working through their stock that they bought last year or the year before. So, we kind of hit
That's
the market
because they killed
saturation
Dutton
point.
in Yellowstone. Like, what the heck, right? Like, what a way to kill a...
So I'm hoping one of the spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the last half season of Yellowstone, but
I think everybody knows.
But I don't know. In 1923, they had a guy who's hunting lions and stuff. So I mean, it's a very different market coming out of Taylor Sheridan. But that's the thing. Less demand in the hatter market for sure, but still really good prices for well put up big beavers. So. That's encouraging. Wild mink, very strong again this year. Clearances on foxes were really strong this year as well. I think it was 100 or nearly 100 on reds and crosses and silvers. So a bit softer on white fox. So encouraging news on fox that hasn't necessarily been as strong the last couple of years. Lynx was solid again this year, or in this sale, I should say. But the news, the headlines, I'm burying the lead here, is the leads were sable and bobcat. Or Martin and bobcat, what in industry parlance they call sable and lynx cat.
Yeah.
The lynx cat prices were very, very strong. $1,000, $1,500. Top lot was $1,550, I think, but a lot in that $1,000 to $1,500 American range. So that's super strong. Sable was super strong. FHA said there was over 100 buyers in the room during the sable sale, which is very impressive because I don't think you could really fit many more people in that room. I haven't been there a couple of times now. Lots of demand for sable, lots of competition over sable. So, hopefully we'll see that carry through into the June sale as well. I know that the cats on the March sale were mostly leftover cats from last year, whereas the June sale have fresh cats. I think Downey's update said that there's gonna be like 7,500 cats on the sale in June.
Yep.
So hopefully see a lot more or continued demand, I guess, from folks looking to get a hold of lynx cats. So it's the nature of a wild fur auction with how many different things are there is there's good news and bad news in every sale. Muskrats are still soft. Coyote is still soft compared to what it was 10, 12 years ago. Which is really disappointing news for a lot of guys that are out there that what they've got available to them is muskrat or coyote or raccoon. Raccoons
like
come up
the
a little
southern
bit.
half of Alberta and Saskatchewan, Manitoba, like it's coyote country. So
that's what they've got, right? And I've had that conversation with a few folks of at the Saskatchewan Trappers Association and others. It's just like there's a whole lot of guys that was all they did was snare coyotes. So if coyote prices are soft, they're not out there snaring coyotes, obviously. So it's
and it's not like there's a lot of marten running around in the
I'd be pretty
areas
confused
of the
if,
southern prairies.
if I was somewhere down around Humboldt and saw a sable running around. I mean, you're escaped from a private collection.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So yeah, that's, it's certainly unfortunate that coyote prices aren't where we would all like them to be. Unfortunate that muskrat prices aren't where we would want them to be. We're hoping certainly as ranch mink prices continue to climb that we kind of hit that unknown point where the coat manufacturers in China and Korea will switch back to muskrat for liners instead of buying ranch mink. But there is ranch mink in China. And I don't know if you've talked about this before, but there's mink that's ranched in China that's not sold on auction, that's kind of an unknown to all of the rest of the world fur industry, of what is really being produced there, how much is being produced there. It gets produced there, is dressed there, is manufactured there, so it never really touches on the rest of the global industry in a way that would allow us to really have a strong understanding of what's going on in the Chinese mink industry. And there's Chinese fox and Chinese fin raccoon, and basically if you can farm it, it's farmed in China as well. And once upon a time it was in the interest of building stronger connections between the Western world and China, and there were Canadian mink farmers that went to China and helped train them on farming mink, helped them really kind of build an industry there. Canadian fox farmers and American fox farmers and Finnish fox farmers were all over there helping them set up a fox industry. But it's very self-contained. We're not seeing that mink on the auction block at Saga. We're not seeing that mink really make it out of China. It's not getting manufactured in Turkey. It's not getting manufactured in South Korea, really. But it certainly is something that is just a big question mark. We can look at the map of here's what we know, basically almost like to the dozen how many mink are getting bred in Canada, getting produced in Canada and the US and European countries, and then kind of here's a best guess of what's getting produced in China.
Yeah, I guess if you're just solely serving a domestic market, if unless they want to increase production to then start making money going outside, but China is such a large consumer just with the size of the country that probably just hard to keep up with their own nation's demand. So nothing against that, like good on them, like that's
it's the reality of
sovereign countries looking after themselves and trading amongst themselves. So I guess hats off to them. So
yeah, but all that to say that there are some the happy stories in the state of fur prices right now, and hopefully things continue on an upward trajectory. As we've talked about on I think the past couple of episodes, we're seeing fur on runways. We're seeing positive coverage of fur in newspapers and fashion magazines and things like that. There's a very
recycling is a big one we talked about last time. Refurbishing.
Yeah, very real
stuff. Yep.
Conversation going on right now in the fashion world about fur. So, if that continues to be the case, then, ideally we'll see more production and higher prices.
Yeah, cool. One I think that really struck me about what you just said was strong prices for marten. Other than sort of like what we talked about, kind of the coyote region of Canada and the dependence on that market, that marten's got to be like a real staple for Canada.
That's
as long as you got a forest somewhere, I think in this nation you find pine marten.
Yeah, just about. Like it's these species that are native to the boreal forest. We got lots of boreal forests. So
yeah, exactly.
It's very much a case of when people want to buy sable, if they're not buying Russian sable, they're buying Canadian sable, and that's something that that international fur buyers, they're coming to Canada to buy sable. There's people I'm sure that were in North Bay. That was all they were there for.
Yeah.
Was they were there for the sable sale, and they left as soon as it was over. And, we see that, with different items on the sale. There'll be people there just buying bears, just buying wolves, just buying beaver, just buying cats. And then there's guys that are there that they have, an order for muskrats, and an order for red fox, and an order for coyote, and an order for sable, and an order for, they're there the entire 3 days in the room all day, every day, because they've got a diverse clientele.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask, there's a couple species that they're not the big glamour species, but weasel and squirrels. I actually really like trapping squirrels. It's actually
weasels
a lot of fun.
Weasels were quite strong on this sale compared to there's kind of consistent strength in weasels, and now I'm doing the thing you get mad at me for and pulling up another window to look at what's going on. Weasels were, because I'm pulling up the auction results. Weasels cleared at 100%. There was 8,000 weasels on the sale. Average was $754, and top lot was $23, and that's all in American dollars. So, for squirrel was softer. Squirrel was down to only 60% cleared. Average to $1.27. But yeah, weasels continue to be strong.
Wow, that's
weasels, right? That's the
for weasels. Yeah, no.
Anytime we talk about auction
everybody
results, we can say, at the end of every sentence, imagine I'm saying, for insert species here and for 2025, right? It's not it's not 1980s prices, but
we got it. We got to get the runway models and the high fashion to be interested in flying squirrels. It's beautiful soft fur, kind of like chinchillas. But holy smokes,
there'd be a lot of really happy sable trappers if we had a really strong market for flying squirrels.
Good, it's sort of like a 2-to-1 ratio of catching those things. So. Well, that's good. Good. Any other kind of highlights from?
I think that was kind of the going into the sale, especially the North Bay sale. There was a lot of uncertainty with tariffs and what's going on at the border. It was a lot of people were, I wouldn't even necessarily say worried, but a lot curious almost as to what the impact would be. I don't think that, you look at the auction results and you don't go, okay, well, everything was down 25% because of the tariff. Fur is a very global industry. There were buyers there representing just about every corner of the world. So, 25% tariff on the Canada-US border doesn't affect Turkish buyers and Korean buyers.
Oh, I see. Yep.
So if folks that were buying from the States had to compete with people from other parts of the world, the price was the price. Yeah. So, there were a few things that were, I think a bit softer that generally are American market bound, but, talking to different people in and around the sale, they said even that may not have just been tariffs. It may have been the collection that was available. It may have been just the general state of the economy in the U.S. So there's not as much demand for things like taxidermy at the moment. So nothing in there makes me go, oh, obviously because of the tariffs, this is what's going on. We still see that effect on raccoon because of the sanctions in Russia. Raccoon is still softer than it would be otherwise if there were no war in Ukraine. But in terms of the American tariff stuff, it didn't, it didn't cast a shadow over the whole sale the way that maybe it could have.
Well, good. Hopefully we'll stay under the radar screen there of who. So the Chicago fur ban proposal, what was happening there? We're kind of stepping outside of Canada, but it's important to look around the world, just like at the Saga auction results. So
yeah, so in Chicago, kind of a few weeks ago, kind of out of nowhere, we heard Chicago City Council, kind of out of nowhere, there was this proposal that was like, already halfway through the process before anybody really clued in it was there. And this is something we see, we see city by city attempts to ban sale of retail fur, especially in the U.S. And, it's much more difficult to actually ever try and bring forward something like that in Canada. But in the U.S., the cities have a lot of power, so they're able to do these things. And, there was the Denver fur ban proposal there a few months ago that we managed to beat, and then
last fall that would have been like crazy because that was like fly tying materials and
it would have been a lot of very unhappy
the
people
hats,
in the state
the fur
of Colorado.
hats we were talking about, the felt hats.
So Chicago, kind of the same thing, but Denver we saw coming, Chicago we didn't. So there wasn't anybody like really rabble rousing about like, I'm going to ban fur in Chicago. It was just like, oh wait, where did this come from? So it's given the sensitive state of Canada-U.S. relations at the moment, we do what we can to support when there's fights in the U.S. And I've sent testimony to Hawaii and Washington and all over the U.S. saying this is important to Canada, it's important to our North American relationship, free trade, et cetera, et cetera. But given the current state of things in conversations with my American counterparts, I was like, we'll sit back. Anything you need from us, let us know. But like, we'll avoid turning this into a Canada-U.S. fight at the Chicago City Council. But our friends at the International Fur Federation and the American Fur Council, that plays a very similar role to us here at the FIC on the promotion of like fur fashion in the U.S. and National Trappers Association, Fur Takers of America, a lot of retailers, really all threw in on fighting this ban. And one thing that we don't necessarily appreciate as much, or certainly I'll say I didn't appreciate as much before joining this world, and dealing with the Americans quite a bit, is the importance of fur in the Black community. And that's something that we've seen when there's been attempts to ban fur in Detroit, now in Chicago. The Black community are have been a very strong ally in fighting against fur bans. And it still remains a very important kind of social indicator in the Black community in a way that it isn't necessarily still in the white community. So a lot of great work with the Chicago Black Caucus, the Chicago Latino Caucus, really pushing back against this out of nowhere attempt to ban fur, and it worked. They beat the ban. So we continue to push back on these. The antis are racking up a pretty good streak of losses at this point. They lost in New York a few years ago. They lost in Denver last year. They lost in Chicago this year. And the more times we win, the easier it gets to win the next one. And so just kind of a tip of the cap to or if any of our American friends are listening, because they did it. They beat Chicago. So and there's still fur retailers in Chicago that are important parts of the community. And if anyone's listening from Chicago, you can go buy yourself a fur coat, celebrate.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something like that. Like if you lose that at a city municipal kind of level, like that's a domino effect. Like that's just going to ripple, across the United States. Then you're going to have, your societies here in Canada are going to be looking to leverage those wins here. And like it's just a giant domino thing. So yeah, that's pretty important to,
and we saw that in the States already with the California fur ban. The California fur ban started as a San Francisco or San Diego. I forget which. I think it was San Francisco fur ban.
Probably San Francisco.
Banned in one city, and then it dominoed into a full state ban. And thankfully, beyond that, they haven't really been able to break out of California and ban fur in other states. There's bans on certain things in certain places. Beaver trapping in Massachusetts and some things like that, but not in they're dominoes, but they're not a snowball. To butcher your metaphor, is they haven't really been able to gain the momentum and say, okay, we banned fur in one state, now we've banned fur in 5 states, now we've banned fur in 20 states, we should ban fur across the U.S.
Yeah.
The way that we saw with seal products in the EU. They tried to ban seal products in the Netherlands, and then they tried to ban seal products in Belgium, or they did successfully, and then they said, well, because of the way that the trade relationship works in the EU, if we're going to ban it, so should everyone. Because we don't want it that you can live in France and buy a seal product and then drive across the border into Belgium with your seal product. So, those are the kinds of domino effects that we can see, that if they manage to win one, they may win more. So as long as we can keep them on a losing streak, and continue to demonstrate public opinion that, like, the reality being is that the average person doesn't mind the sale of fur.
Yeah, I think that's a really key one, and we've seen that play out a couple of times with hunting and trapping, especially in the United States, is when it comes to these like ballot initiatives or these public, processes to move these ballot forwards. It is the non-trapping, the non-hunting communities that are educated by hunters and trappers, and they get the information, they can form balanced opinions, and then they can see why this is not fair, it's not beneficial, it's not, in the best interest of, employments or economies or people's ways of life. And it's that support that cancels these bills, because as if it was just left up to like the trapping community or the hunting community, like we don't have enough numbers to to outvote these things. So when our messages get to the non-sustainable use crowd, then there's the support to knock these bills off. And I think that's why it's important that everybody kind of get outside of your own little groups and make contact with folks in your community that don't trap or hunt, because when push comes to shove, they're the ones that are got to go, no, I know some trappers and what they're saying over there. Nah, I can't buy that, and I'll vote this down. So
yeah, exactly. So my neighbor Mark, he's a trapper. He's not a bad guy. That goes a long way in that kind of 90% of people we look at the graph and there's the red at one end and the green at the other. The overwhelming portion of that graph is gray, of people that don't have strong feelings one way or another. So for us, it's just about being able to put forward a coherent enough message that it can punch through the dollars that the other side can bring to it. Because at the end of the day, the antis are still fairly well provisioned. Despite the giant lawsuit that Greenpeace just lost in the U.S., and there's IFAW is facing some legal trouble in Africa that I think Robbie was talking about on Blood Origin's Mothership. Those are the kinds of things that may change the landscape here when it comes to dealing with the antis. Is that if in certain places where they are doing things that are legitimately damaging to communities, if they're then held fiscally and financially responsible, there's not going to be a whole lot of money left for billboard ads outside of City Hall. So we'll see where the next fight is. I'm sure there will be another one.
Something will pop up.
Minneapolis.
Hopefully
it'll
be something that. Yeah, hopefully it'll be something that we have some lead time on. So
yeah.
Federal election. So that's set to be at the end of April 28th, I think.
Yeah, so I mean,
it's trapping is not what all of the political leaders are having debates about and the media is covering, but there is a pretty big one that affects everybody's way of life in this country, regardless of whether you are a licensed trapper or a hunter or whoever. And it's kind of the dividing line between the future of firearms ownership and not. And I think that's that's a big one that's probably has common ground across a lot of user groups in this country for this coming election. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I will start this with the official disclaimer of the Fur Institute of Canada is a non-partisan organization and does not take stances on political issues. But the reality is that there are policy positions taken by various parties that are things we are supportive of and other things we are not. We're non-partisan, but we're not paying attention. I'm not out there, shaking hands with insert party leader here in front of news cameras. But, we do advocate as the FIC, we advocate, to MPs and senators and party staff around the issues that matter to us. And, we see that with our Fur Day on the Hill every year and National Steel Products Day, which isn't going to happen this year because there's an election on the way. There's, and some of this stuff is punching through. We've seen thus far on day one of the campaign, the Conservatives were making an announcement about supporting the seal hunt. The Bloc Québécois put out their platform yesterday, and they mentioned the need to support and diversify the seal hunt. So, it's not nothing to say that there is support. And certainly the Conservatives and their position on firearms. I testified against Bill C-21 at the Senate because it was legitimately endangering the ability of trappers to do what they do. And, I've written enough letters and sat through enough technical briefings about different things that the current federal government has done on firearms and its ability to impact trappers. And when we're banning 22s, there's probably someone somewhere in this country who's got a trapping license who's using that 22 for a humane dispatch. We hear back, it's like, oh, there's only like 632 of them in the country. I'm like, one of those is owned by a trapper. I'm sure one of them is
somewhere. Yeah.
And we've heard the same with seal hunters of some of the firearms that have been banned are firearms that seal hunters use. So, it's not a partisan statement to say that, I really wish that the government, whoever that may be, thinks about trappers and thinks about seal hunters when making decisions about firearms. When C-21 came out, I sent a letter to all the members of the SECU, the Public Safety Committee, that got kicked from somebody to a policy advisor in the Public Safety Minister's office, and I had a great conversation with him. He was like, we honestly just didn't think trappers.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. Thanks, bud. Like, what are you going to do about it now? And the answer ended up being nothing. But that's the role that the Institute can play is kind of being like, hey, look at us. Pay attention to us. We have issues.
Gotcha.
That every political party needs to support. And, we see that. We've seen that change over the years on things like the seal hunt. And I'm not going to take full credit for the Institute on that front, but we've played a part in that conversation of getting kind of everybody on every major political party outside of the Greens on side with supporting the Canadian seal hunt. When I was a political staffer or political volunteer on the Hill, you had Liberal senators bringing forward bills to end the seal hunt. That's not going to happen today, I don't think. It'd be maybe Elizabeth May will do it, but not mainline political actors and operators are not going to do that. And ideally, the same could be said of trapping. And we see MPs from every party on Fur Day on the Hill. We meet with MPs from every party. We have MPs from just about every party show up to our reception because it's a really fun time. And sometimes they'll say like, hey, I'm on side with you, but I could really use your help in helping to convince some of my, caucus mates. And, cause they just don't know, all they know is what they've read in the news. And that's generally not very positive for your way of life. And then we know, and we can go, okay, I'm going to go meet with, can you help me get a meeting with that person or get them to come to our reception, and I'll find 5 minutes there to go have a chat with them. And, we've built relationships with with MPs from all parties, some of whom were pretty skeptical to begin with. So, there is value in being a nonpartisan organization, because then everybody can look to you as a source of information.
Yeah, 100%. And no, those are really good points. And I do recall, when the election was announced, it was literally like the next morning, like the seal hunt was like one of the first stories I saw the next morning, and I was just like, holy, that's like front and center, like, in Atlantic Canada, like right out of the gate. So exciting, exciting. And I think if there's that level of commitment, as you know, and our listeners probably know, the big political challenge would be for a new government to be breaking down the trade barriers around the world, so we can increase the hunt all we want for the balancing of the fishery side of things, but everybody still wants all of those animals to be fully utilized and go to a market somewhere and make a living off of it. So we've got to tackle the trade barriers, trade bans, in concert, I think, with addressing the industry. So.
And I mean, we're at a pretty critical point here when it comes to seal products and breaking down trade barriers. At some point in the first half of this year, the European Commission will release what their recommendation is to the European Parliament on the consultations they did last year about the trade ban on seal products working as intended. And even beyond that, if it's working as intended, is that still our intention? We were very involved and worked with.
If your intention was to kill a way of life and people's livelihoods, then
yeah.
But what's your new intentions?
So I think that there is kind of a little bit of a existential debate almost, or will be hopefully within the European Parliament, of is saving European public morality, because that was their justification to the World Trade Organization, is that worth destroying the livelihoods, heritage, and communities of people across not just Canada, frankly, Canada, Namibia, Northern Europe. There's European states that are like, this is destroying our communities. What are you guys doing? We're all kind of waiting, and if it's, ideally it doesn't drop in the middle of the federal election, because we'll need the federal government to be able to react and engage in very short order with the European Parliament and the European Commission around whatever those recommendations end up being. And I have no special insight into what they're going to say should happen. I just know what I told them I think should happen on behalf of the FIC and the Seals and Sealing Network. But it's, that will be one of the challenges that the government has to deal with after this federal, whatever stripe that government ends up being. In likely the first 2 months of a government, they'll have to deal with what has been a major trade irritant in the relationship between Canada and the EU for almost 20 years now.
Yeah. Well, positive. I mean, positive things are happening, and I think that's what we got to take away from what we're seeing in the election and in the EU. So I'm very optimistic.
Yeah. And if these issues matter to you, reach out to your local candidates, regardless of party.
There's a good point.
Right? That's the, for people that have known me before I wore this ball cap, I used to wear a political one once upon a time, but I can put that to the side and say that talk to your NDP candidate, talk to your Conservative candidate, talk to your Liberal candidate, say these are issues that are important to us. Invite them to your Trappers local district meeting and say, hey, come talk to us. Tell us what it is you're going to do for us. Because, there's not, some of our greatest allies, even in the Liberal Party, are retiring. There were people in the Liberal Party, MPs in the Liberal Party, who were very supportive of the seal hunt, who were very supportive of trapping. Unfortunately, a lot of them are retiring. So, if there are folks, if you are in rural areas or not rural areas, frankly, but especially if you're in rural areas, please go talk to as many of your candidates, or send an email, write the email out, copy and paste it, send it to everybody. Say, these are the issues that are important to me, and if they're important to you too, maybe that will influence how I vote.
Yeah. And you know what? This isn't just like a North and an East Coast Canada topic.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a West Coast with, a burgeoning seal population, pinniped population, and declining Pacific salmon stocks and stuff. So, there's a big discrepancy between, commercial harvesting on the east and west coast of this country, and something's got to give as well on the west coast. So don't be shy, folks. No matter where you are, reach out to the western MPs as well on this topic, because the Pacific harvest, the Pacific industry is got to get onto people's radar if something big starts to shift in the EU. So.
Yeah. And the one thing I will also say, as someone who has spent far too many days in the blistering sun and pouring rain on doorsteps of people who did not agree with my politics or the politics of people that I was representing, is be nice to the door knockers. They're an important part of our process. Whether you agree with them or not, they will not know the answer to every question. They will not know every position of their party or their candidate. Be nice to the door knockers.
There you go. Never know.
Yeah, never know. They may end up being the executive director of the Fur Institute someday.
Could be, but you're such a recognizable figure from this show. People will automatically know you and whatnot. So, moving on. Next topic: the FIC AGM in June. Update and a plug for that.
Yeah, for sure. Just want to remind folks, if you're in the Edmonton area or willing to drive to Edmonton, we're going to be
not right now because it's a blizzard.
Yeah, don't do that today. Do that in June, because that's when we'll be there. So we're having our AGM in Edmonton on the I think it's the 13th, the Friday the 13th. I just realized that might not be ideal. But that's our AGM. So certainly for any Fur Institute members who are listening, that's your chance to come and say your piece about what the Institute is doing, what we could be doing, get updates on the stuff we've done over the course of the past year. Anyone who's listening from the ATA, we'd be happy to see you there as well. Final venue details stuff, I'm waiting for a contract in my inbox right now, or today, I should say, to sign. So hopefully have some more details out in the very, very, very near future for folks to be able to attend. So it'll be.
So where would folks keep to get updates on registration, all of that sort of stuff? So if newsletter, website.
Yeah. So keep an eye on the Fur Institute Instagram. Fur Institute of Canada on Instagram, and on fur.ca. So we'll have more details in the very near future. I was hoping to have that contract this morning and already signed before we recorded, but it's not quite there. So I don't want to have to publish a correction after this. So on the next episode of Truth About Fur podcast, I can give you many more details.
Yeah, we got a few more before June, so that we can also be a vehicle for letting folks know about that follow us. So super cool. Looking forward to that exciting time when people get together and non-winter seasons. So big story on a big piece of Canadian history unfolding since the last show with the Hudson Bay Company.
Yeah, so the as folks probably have seen in the news or heard on the Around Canada podcast, you and Dana scooped me, is that the Hudson Bay Company is moving into creditor protection or bankruptcy for all intents and purposes. They're working to try and preserve, I think it's 6 stores in Montreal and Toronto, but outside of that, looks like probably the entire company will be going under. I'd like to say it's because they don't sell fur anymore. That probably wouldn't be entirely honest, but
I totally think it is. that was whatever you know around and find out. So they
exactly.
publicly bailed out of fur not that long ago either. So lesson to you, stores.
Yeah, so it's there's part of me that can be angry that they got out of fur, and then there's part of me that is disappointed that a big piece of Canadian heritage and Canadian history may be going by the wayside. I mean, it was sold to American venture capital like 20 years ago anyway, so it's not like a total rally around the flag moment to see HBC go under, but ideally whoever comes out of these bankruptcy proceedings actually owning the Hudson Bay Company name will be interested in reconnecting the company and its name with its roots, and sell get back into the fur game and really make this a Canadian
Coyotes, folks.
brand.
Whoever buys HBC coyotes, we need coyote fur trim, everything.
Yeah, if you're listening out there, billionaire venture capitalists who are going to buy HBC, I know that is the primary demographic that listens to the Truth About Fur podcast.
Yes.
If you could buy HBC and turn it into a muskrat coat with coyote trim manufacturing company, it'd really go a long way.
And we're speaking directly to you, Jeff Bezos.
If Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are listening right now, Elon, I know you just spent a bunch of money on Twitter, but
the first Canadian fur into space, like those space flights. It's what is it, the Blue Horizon or whatever the Jeff Bezos space company's for. So
yeah, it could be. So so that's it's weird to me to think of a world without Hudson Bay Company.
Absolutely. It's just such a big part of Canada's history. When we covered this story on the Around Canada podcast earlier last week, a couple sort of notable things to the theme of this podcast that I pointed out was the Hudson Bay Company was one of the first, I guess, private entities in North America to start looking at its power to achieve conservation objectives. And when beavers were declining or struggling, they realized from a conservation perspective they needed to be able to shift pressure away from that and get more trappers to be more interested in marten and sort of leave beaver colonies alone to build up. And they actually used market incentives to do that. And they, at a point in history, purposely inflated what they were paying for muskrats to change trapper behavior for a conservation goal. And that was done hundreds of years ago. And I think that was pretty cool. They were also involved a little bit into getting into field-based conservation research, especially around beavers, and understanding, sort of getting some science on the ground to understand them a little bit. And of course, there's the famous equations that were developed in the wildlife management world that can be used to define predator-prey relationships among different guilds of wildlife. The relationships are known as the Lotka-Volterra predator-prey relationship, and that the foundation of that formula, which proved to be very reliable across a number of predator-prey species throughout the world, was based on the records of the Hudson Bay Fur Company in the ups and downs of its lynx, because it was like centuries worth of data that scientists use to develop that relationship between the lynx and the snowshoe hare. So that's still a piece of wildlife management to this day that can be traced back to fur records.
Yeah, and I mean, another kind of more recent, though in many ways equally sad part to the HBC story is NAFA, North American Fur Auctions, was the Hudson Bay Fur Auction, and they sold out in the 70s or 80s. And unfortunately NAFA itself went into creditor protection in 2019. There was an unbroken line until 2019 in that the entity that was the fur auction, not necessarily like the building, but that could trace its lineage all the way back to the first Hudson Bay fur auctions.
Oh, cool.
And the rendezvous and things like that. So that's a a much more 6 years ago piece of history that I'm sure a lot of folks that are listening to this podcast today probably shipped fur to NAFTA at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, we'll see what happens. It'll probably be a story that comes back onto our radar screen at some point, and hopefully there's a positive thing to it. And we've exerted massive pressure on these billionaires and bringing fur back into the HCP line. That was very, very evident from this show that we will influence the buyers of them. So, kind of on that line, the last thing I just wanted to close out here with was just a bit of a celebration and a hats off to trappers everywhere of every generation that have such refined skill sets, unique skill sets to fur bearers and fur bearer ecology that I don't think many people know or understand or give credit to that skill set outside of the industry commercial side of trapping, but the conservation side of wildlife management. And trappers have played a big role in that, in just simply species conservation, biodiversity conservation. A few that I'm very well aware of is the BC Trappers Association and its members have worked to capture lynx for a live lynx rewilding project in Washington State, moving lynx out of British Columbia to Washington State for 100% for conservation, just bringing back, species. And maybe in generations down the road, there will be trappers in Washington State that will benefit from that. But right now, everybody's focus is on let's keep this species in Washington State. So, there's nobody out there that has the skill sets to do that. And I'm just like, trapping, I will always fight for trapping, that it has a relevance to the rest of society, that there's nobody else out there, not even scientists, that have the skill sets to capture these animals and look after them and transport them to a release area. And we can't lose that. We cannot lose that piece of conservation and biodiversity management by losing trapping. The other very similar story was members of the Alberta Trappers Association that were live capturing fishers, looking after them, getting the health checks done, and exporting them to the Cascade region of the Pacific Northwest in the U.S. for fisher reintroductions. Trappers in northern Alberta, members of the ATA, were also the key people in a endangered caribou recovery project in the boreal and the far north of Alberta, because they were the only ones that were actually suited to go into those environments in the wintertime and be fully equipped if something didn't work out to survive, a day or two. And they were putting up trail cameras for the scientists that were monitoring caribou activity in various areas, as well as sound recordings that were gathering sound recordings of predators in geographic areas. Members of the BCTA are also contribute tissues to the larger genome project that's going on. That's basically cataloging and typing the genomics of wildlife species all over the country. And those are some that I know of that I just want. I want the non-hunting world, the non-trapping world, to know that this is how valuable trappers are to conservation.
Yeah, I mean it's an absolute truth that trappers are an important part of the conservation landscape, and I think that trappers don't necessarily get their fair shake in that, from the broader conservation community and even within our own sustainable use community. I'll be honest. But you look at to use an example from the East Coast, the American marten just got downlisted in Newfoundland and Labrador from their endangered species list. And like in the announcement, they thank the Newfoundland and Labrador Trappers Association for like the collaboration that LTA has done with the province in management and research of the marten population. And that's something that no one can take away. That the reality being, and I worked for 6 years before our time for my time here at the Institute at a large international conservation organization with a presence here in Canada. I encourage anybody who works in the broader conservation space, find a trapper. Like go do your trapping course, meet some trappers, learn some things, because you will absolutely learn things. Not only about trapping, but about the animals that trappers are pursuing, and other animals that just happen to be around while they're out there on the trap line. Because, there's not necessarily a whole lot of other motivations for going into the tangly swamps and deep forests that that trappers find themselves in. Not really a whole lot of other reason to be there. So there's a lot that folks can learn about forest conservation. And actually I heard recently from my friends here at TANS, at the Trappers Association of Nova Scotia, that a large conservation organization, their local staff had reached out to TANS about getting their staff to do the trappers course and learn from trappers about what it is that trapping is all about, and the role it plays in biodiversity conservation and landscape management and things like that. And I was like, that's amazing. Every other conservation organization in the country needs to do that.
Cool.
And get folks out and learn about sustainable use, and learn about the half a dozen, or a bit more, almost a dozen animals hanging on the wall behind me, and the other 12 we figured out earlier before we started the recording that aren't on my wall yet. There's just an incomprehensible amount of knowledge out there, and it's all sitting under camouflage hats. Unfortunately, not nearly enough of them with this logo on the front. But there's the amount I've learned, sitting around after the banquet dinner at Trappers Association meetings, having a couple drinks, and just like sitting there and listening to trappers talk about trapping and talk about animals. I learned more in 3 hours after the BCTA banquet last year than I probably did in half of my time working for conservation organizations. It's really hard to wrap your head around how much trappers know about the landscape and about biodiversity until you actually sit there and try and wrap your head around it. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And, folks, I'm sure there's a million examples, more than just, the few that I know from the West, because that's where I live, across the countries where trappers have been involved in really landmark conservation and rewilding projects. And I'd love to hear about them. If, reach out, and the more I know, the more I can advocate. But, I think kind of my final thought on that as well is trappers can hold their heads high in this country from this conservation perspective, and what they can contribute, their advocacy for habitat. I mean, it's just like you run into any trapper, the first thing they start to talk about is habitat. Logging in an area, this happened, riparian areas, like it's always about that, but they're always being derailed about, like an unfortunate dog story, or, this isn't ethical, or that's not ethical, or whatever. But hold your heads high, and let's get back to, getting into the schools, getting into like early college level students that are, into the wildlife fields or the conservation fields and stuff, and make these connections again, so that younger generation understands the complete value and the skill sets and the knowledge, the connection to the land, to contribute to maybe things that they're going to school for, which is to become wildlife scientists. Like, just build those relationships with young folks so that they go off in their careers and have this connection, with trappers. And rather than sort of taking the approach where it's just sort of like, well, let's just kind of like be super quiet, not make a lot of noise, and hope that, this way of life carries on. But there's nothing to be hidden from society. And if anything, we have to get this out more to show how valuable these skill sets are to the broader society that's interested in biodiversity conservation, because biodiversity conservation will suffer if we lose trappers, because we'll lose that skill set and that long-term knowledge. So get out there and share with things, which they do. We see a lot of great events out of these the rendezvous and stuff like in Alberta and whatnot that connect trappers and the public. So
the Beanbuster Challenge is a great way to connect.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's an important part of conservation too. So has to do with greenhouse gases. So. Cool, great episode. Reach out, folks, if you got anything happening in your part of the country you want to let us in on, and we'll get it on to the show.
Absolutely. So, we'll see you all next time.
You bet.